Welcome, colleagues, to session 2 of our ongoing series in the anatomy of a practice transition from a doctor's perspective. Again, today we are privileged to have the CEO of the Williams Group, Dr. Gillen Cockrell, as I mentioned, but for those of you who perhaps weren't able to see our first series, Dr. Cockrell had a very large, extremely successful, extremely profitable private practice here in the Midwest, multiple doctor, multiple location. And so he brings an interesting doctor's perspective, both to owning and managing a successful practice. But what's particularly germane to our series here today is he also sat on your side of the table and had to negotiate and go through the selling process. And one of the things that Dr. Cockrell brought up that we thought would be an excellent topic, and so we're going to turn it over here, is how do you get ready to do the deal? Many doctors, I think that perhaps that, they just sit back and they supply a little bit of information and they get an offer and they accept it and on they go. And in 60 days, they have a check. And as Dr. Cockrell will probably address, that may have happened occasionally, but it doesn't happen very often. So we thought in our second part series, in our second addition to our series, might be interesting to hear from Dr. Cockrell about his thoughts on how do you get ready to do the deal. Dr. Cockrell, welcome.
Thanks again, Bill. So as we talked about in our first session, there's kind of the simple view, or in my case, the simpleton view. I cared about what's the value, and then I cared about how and when am I getting paid, and then who's accepting the liability for things that I have done in the past or may surface in the future here. But that's really kind of the simple 30,000 foot view. And then things start to get more complex. So, what's really required to get ready to do one of these deals? Well, there's quite a bit of data. There's quite a bit of data that needs to be compiled, and having some guidance on not only the compilation of the data, but how it's compiled and how you're expected to present that data to an attorney or to a private equity group or whoever you might be completing that transaction with. So how that data is presented is really, really important. Understanding what is maybe can be added back to increase EBITDA. That's actually real. That you're not going to be you're not going to be subject to proving that over and over again. And then being able to get that data compiled in a succinct and timely manner. Because if your deal drags on, you get to do it over and over again. Because you're gonna have to keep a running tab on what's really happening historically in your practice. So that's easier said than done. And having some guidance on what data you really need to compile, what form it really needs to take, and then how that data is going to get transmitted to whoever you're doing your transaction with. Well, even that's different than probably what most optometrists have ever done. So just having somebody in the background to remove all those technical obstacles so that you can focus on the things that are really important is really helpful. And then step 2, I got my data together. Now I've got to negotiate something. And I know what my EBITDA is, or I think I do. And then you get to find out that there's the EBITDA. Boy, that's just arithmetic. Surely that's an easy thing.
Yes. And
then you get five people looking at your data, and suddenly you got 5 different EBITDAs. How can that be?
Right.
right. So having somebody to help present, defend, and codify your EBITDA is a big deal, because even at the end, your deal's not done until a process called quality of earnings is performed. And what that really means is, we're going to see, doctor, did you cook the books here? Did you add some things in? Because guess what? You're going to get to prove this. And
right.
So having some guidance on optimizing or maximizing the value without putting yourself at some kind of risk both monetarily and contractually, is kind of where the I'd say where the trail begins. That's the trailhead,
Yeah,
and
that's the trailhead.
that's the trailhead, and things heat up a little bit from there. And
Dr.
I'm happy
Cockrell,
to talk about those if you'd like.
yeah. How do you think COVID? I think quality of earnings. That's a term that it's been around the accounting world for a long time, but that's a term that's very new and to most of our clients that we do representation. And when they first hear that, they're not exactly sure. What is quality of earnings? Because once the LOI is signed, obviously there's great joy and satisfaction and that I've agreed to a number and like most is being human nature, you can just see mentally people starting to think about what they're going to do with all that money. And then, 3-4 weeks after the LOI is signed, we have this conversation on quality of earnings. How have you seen COVID perhaps impact the quality of earnings issue?
Oh, well, what COVID did was strike fear into the heart of both sides of the equation, both the seller and the buyer, because it created a vast unknown desert of what ifs and what could be and what might be, and we're seeing that right now. I just read a Jobson report yesterday showing that practices were declining in April, and they'll probably decline in May compared to 2019 levels. And I really believe if practices had guidance early in this, when the whole world was having a party over shutting down their practice, they could have addressed this better. I worked with 2 clients yesterday who are going to close April with the biggest Aprils they've ever had. So, in this whole quality of earnings, a year ago, actually probably 15 months ago now or 14 months ago now, a practice needed to start planning a lot on how am I going to address this COVID gap that I've created in maybe the middle of March to maybe the end of May, in some cases clear into June in some practices. So that's created tremendous uncertainty on the quality of earnings and made it and actually made it a critical part of the deal now, and along with driving concern for can an earnout be met or not, or what's the in defense and maybe just the reality of the confidence and respect that some private equity groups have for the resiliency and the people involved in an optometric practice. A lot of times those there's a pretty lenient period of time that's given to meet those earnouts or to get a practice back to a pre-COVID level. But that's another reason that I'd be careful about artificially running up my gross to something
right.
that maybe I couldn't comfortably sustain or realistically sustain after my sale. Because in the end, from my experiences, the people on both sides of the equation, certainly trying to position themselves the best that they can, while, in my experience, kind of protecting their integrity. And so,
right.
If I promise you, if I say I'll do this, I will do this. But don't create a situation that makes it less likely that I can.
Unsustainable over long.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
And Gillen, when you talk about getting ready for the deal, your remarks we closed a very large transaction last fall, and when our client, after the deal was agreed to and the LOI was signed, obviously his first thing was he wanted to get legal counsel, of course, and so I recommended a couple lawyers to him who had done transactions of this size and magnitude, and so he interviewed one over the phone, and our client called the next day, and he says, the lawyer told me this is going to be 120 days of hell. Is that what I signed up for? And I said, well, I don't know if I would describe it as 120 days of hell, but it certainly is tedious. There's no question about it. You're going to be asked for a lot of information, and sometimes the same piece of information from the same company by two different people. And I said, it's just the nature of the beast. It does get tedious. Towards the end, you just want to get it done, but just keep your eye on the prize. Let's just get the information and get it to them as timely as we can, as completely as we can. And because it is 120 days of hell / tediousness. But that is true in any transaction. The buyer and the buyer's representatives will require several things to do their complete due diligence, and but it is a tedious process, no question.
Well, Bill, I enjoy doing these deals, but maybe what I enjoy a little bit about it is if there was ever a time to be organized, it's now. And so, getting your data compiled and in a way that you can keep it current in a simple form. We certainly have worked with doctors that when a request has been made for information, they can actually meet that request within minutes to no more than a couple of hours. But then we have doctors that it takes days to weeks to get information in, and what that results in is I'd call it legal fee bloat. And if you can get your attorneys writing a bunch of letters back and forth asking about clarification of questions, that's expensive. And so
yes, very costly.
That's where your representative can save you tremendous amounts of money by answering and clarifying the trail, as we talked about.
Right.
The kind of the trailhead and the trail in the path in between. From what I've seen, most of the attorneys that we've worked with have the best interest of their client at heart. I've really not seen attorneys
I would agree with that,
trying to run up the price on, but they're going down a path many times that they're not familiar with. And so when you're going down that path you're not familiar with, regardless of your intentions, you might take a wrong turn. And so that's one of the areas that I believe that representation, which I will admit I didn't have in my deal, or that maybe not is true, maybe not quite completely true. I had some attorneys that represented me, but they were just as lost as I was and in the deal, and that cost us money and time and value actually. So I would just caution that. And a lot of times I find these deals amusing and things that happen in them, but then a lot of times I many times, Bill, have I called you and said, "Oh my goodness, this doctor is making a decision here that's gonna cost them hundreds of thousands, maybe more than $1 million, and because they think they know the path, and the path isn't always that easy." And then the other place that you can there's about 4 places I think that I can identify pretty easy that are potential quicksand. And as we mentioned, the first place is compilation of that data, organization of the data, and being able to keep that data current in an ongoing manner, because as you mentioned, it's rare that you close a deal in less than 90 days. They're closer to 120 to 180 days to get a deal closed, and then throw a COVID thing into the environment, and that really extended some of those deals for several more months. But so that compilation of data, negotiating the deal points, because they're going to mail you a contract that's pretty scary looking, and there are things in that contract that can be negotiated. There's things in that contract that cannot be negotiated. Having representation that can tell you, we may not like exactly the way this is worded, but it's not getting changed because they've already purchased 700 practices. The words are the same in every contract, because there's another end game. This is purchasing your practice, doctor, is not the end game.
Right.
The end game is rolling up a whole bunch of practices and then moving them to another entity. Well, that entity doesn't want to sift through 500 contracts that are all different. They want to look at 500 contracts that are relatively the same, so they can read them and compile the data a little easier. So that negotiating the deal points is a big deal. And then the next one is every state's a little bit different. How these deals are structured is different in order to comply with state laws. So getting through that corporate structure, and I don't participate in a lot of these deals, so keeping all the different forms straight. Well, I never even heard of most of the forms in my career. I didn't sit around filing, bill all the form names and what they mean that you can rattle right off in your sleep. And so knowing those so that you don't find yourself liable, because I keep talking about liability, and you don't want to get paid $1 million and find out that somehow none of it's yours because you didn't file something correctly.
Right.
And then of course the tax ramifications of the way your deal's structured.
Right.
And then I'm not absolutely sure that you coined this term, Bill, but you're the first guy I ever heard use it, and it's called deal fatigue. And if you don't have all this stuff lined out, you're definitely going to get deal fatigue. And even if you do, most of us suffer from deal fatigue because finally, you saw the carrot right up front. They showed you the carrot. You just want to get to the carrot. But
exactly. You didn't see the stick. You didn't see the stick in the other hand behind their back. Exactly.
Yeah, that's exactly right. You didn't see the stick, and so you can stumble while you're trying to get to the carrot.
Absolutely.
And, so I'm not sure when you want to talk about those a little bit more, but those are some things that I think are.
I think those were all really excellent.
Really important.
Thanks for sharing those thoughts. And we'll maybe address a couple of other important things in our next couple of series. Again, thanks, Dr. Cockrell, for taking time to join us in session 2 of Practice Transitions from a Doctor's Perspective.